Let's do something different on this channel, shall we? And take a look at this petition. So I'm not going to sign it, and I'm going to explain why after I have read it and gone through it. So, the UK's exit date from the EU is fast approaching, and our new Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has promised to take the UK out of the EU by the end of October, do or die. A promise that's already caused cabinet ministers to resign. Well, of course they are. They don't like the leave vote. If Boris allows this to happen, he is betraying future generations. How exactly? How is he betraying future generations? By allowing that to happen. Not just their opportunities, their futures, their freedoms, but their trust too. Without some kind of Brexit deal, NHS chiefs have warned they could quickly run out of vital medicines and may have to delay operations for people in need. Citation, please. Supermarkets have spoken out about their concern for our fresh food supply. Citation, please. Politicians on both sides of the channel have said that this would mean a hard border in Ireland. Maybe. I'd have to look into that. People started stockpiling because there is so much uncertainty. Why? Why are we so scared that we might starve overnight? I mean, what? Do you really think our government is really that stupid to allow us to starve? Jesus Christ. With this petition, let's demand that Boris rolls out no deal and seeks an extension to find common ground across the political spectrum. Extension, you say? You mean when we decided to extend the March date to October initially? So you want to extend it potentially again, do you? Do you really want to be that disenfranchised from the political negotiations that have been happening in Parliament? Or perhaps you just want to delay it because you don't actually care about the democratic vote of the British people at the time. I run My Life, My Say, a youth-led group made up of both Remainers and Leavers who have been fighting to make sure that young people aren't forgotten when it comes to Brexit. This is clearly in reference to the fact that people at that time were under the age of the legal age to vote in this country, which happens to also be the age of majority. Well, first of all, there's a reason for that. Why would you allow a child who is still going through education, who is perhaps not as informed as other people, to be making the political decisions that will affect everyone in the country? Do you really think that's a good idea? I don't think so. And when it comes to responsible adults, the implication is that they have the capacity to do their own research and look at both the positives and the negatives of a particular political decision that they have the right to vote for. That's the whole point. So you're just going to ignore that, are you? I usually wouldn't speak up like this, but I'm terrified about what no deal could mean for young people like me. Oh, God. Why are you so scared? Seriously? Oh, for God's sake. Anyway, reports suggest that we'll lose as much as £108,000 in earnings by 2050 if the UK crashes out of the EU without a deal. Citation, please. And also, did you actually read the reports? You say reports suggest. So that's not reports say, it's reports suggest. Well, it suggests, meaning that they don't actually know. In the short term, they say it could cost 18 to 21-year-olds £675 a year and 22 to 29-year-olds £830 a year. By the government's own impact assessments, leaving without a deal would be disastrous for the future of this country and our everyday lives. You know, I'm seeing some contradictions here, because there have been articles in the past that have said that we could thrive outside the EU without a deal. Interesting. There's certainly some contradictions there, and we do need to draw those lines. It doesn't have to be this way, and we must find a way to reunite our country. Right. So you're saying you want to reunite our country. Okay, that makes sense. But then you've got well, this update. Anyway, before I was distracted, so that's clearly just adding to what was originally written here. But anyway, as I was saying before I got distracted, there are ways we can reunite without being completely against the democratic vote of the British people. Because you see, you can refuse the democratic vote of the British people, and you'll be no less better than those who accept it. Because at the end of the day, we're all human. We all have the right to decide what we feel is best for our country. But if you're going to disenfranchise those who voted leave by demanding a reversal of that decision, what does that make you? Exactly. What does that make you? Does it make you any better or worse, do you think? Because it is not about whether you like the vote or not. It's about following through the will of the British people, and the British people voted leave. If you don't like that, live on another planet. I'll tell you a few things about the EU that you need to understand. So the first thing, which I'm sure a lot of Leave voters will vouch for me on this, and that is the common fisheries policy, which a lot of, like I said, Leave voters will probably say, well, it destroyed our fishing industry. Well, yes, it did restrict the it shrunk our jurisdictional borders such that we couldn't go out to a certain degree of miles out from our shores to fish and feed ourselves. I mean, you know, we need to feed ourselves, right? But of course, the imposition there is, well, the whole point of these the common anything prefixed with common by the EU, it has the word sustainability attached to it. Now, I can understand if you feel that the sustainability seems like a good idea. Well, I can understand that if you're young and you don't quite understand the way of the world. The thing is, what your definition of sustainable is not necessarily the definition of another person's sustainable, because sustainability, the word sustainability, is its definition varies from person to person. You have certain parameters you want to follow. There's certain degrees of sustainability that you want to achieve. Well, those degrees of sustainability and those units of measure is going to be debated, and therefore the actual definition of sustainable is more or less subjective than it is objective. So to assume that the EU's idea of sustainability is going to be good for the rest of humanity, I would throw into question, considering the decisions that it has made in other areas. And one other such area is the fact that we had for example, the Dyson court case with the EU, where Dyson sent the EU to the first instance to the courts, basically saying that the energy classification labels they were proposing to become standard across EU member states would be anti-consumer. and Dyson won that court case. You can take a look at it online. In fact, let's have a look ourselves. Dyson takes EU to court energy classification. So let's take a look at that. Dyson heads to European Court over vacuum cleaner energy labels. So here we are. So Dyson will fight an EU court battle over Brussels energy efficiency rules later this month. That was in 14th of October 2017, arguing that the current regime allows rival vacuum cleaner makers to mislead consumers. Let's see. So I'm not going to read it all. You can take a look at it yourself. Let's see. So here's what the ECJ said. So the ECJ ordered the lower court to take into account a deeper assessment of the evidence. At the time, Dyson called it a rare and historic win for consumers. So, I mean, I've read most of this before, and I kind of get an idea of what it was all about. So basically, Dyson took the EU to court over energy classification labels, obviously thinking that it was going to mislead consumers because, as they say here, Dyson says the vacuum cleaners made by Bosch and Siemens consume significantly more power under normal use once dust is in the bag than under the conditions used to test its energy efficiency. So you need to, so this is based on evidence, based on certain conditions with regards to testing machines made by different manufacturers. And the idea, from what it appears to be, is that the EU thought it was a good idea to start creating energy classification labels based on a restricted number of isolated tests, which did not otherwise cover all of the available tests that would be necessary to conduct the full overall idea as to whether or not these energy classification labels would actually be any good and actually help consumers make an informed choice. So of course, we've now got later on this. So as you can see, the EU court ruled Thursday that Brussels regulators are wrong to test the energy efficiency of vacuum cleaners using empty dust bags in a victory for British manufacturer Dyson. So, even though the EU might have learned their lesson, the fact that they went ahead to create energy classification labels initially without having understood the industry all that well proves, at least in my opinion, that the EU should not be making decisions on this level where they do not have the correct information. And if you make irrational decisions based on misled or misinformed information, like in this case, then the laws that you put in place could indeed have disastrous consequences, and that's not what you want. So it was a good idea that Dyson did take the energy efficiency rules to court in the EU, because otherwise we would have had energy classification labels that were anti-consumer. Then there was, of course, the EU fining Microsoft. So let's take a look at that and see what that was all about. So this was quite a long time ago. So let's take a look, shall we? Over antitrust law. So This was to do with Internet Explorer, I believe. Here we are. Yes. So the European Union fined Microsoft $732 million on Wednesday for failing to respect an antitrust settlement with regulators. And that was to do with this. So Microsoft had agreed to alter Windows for 5 years to give users of newly purchased computers in Europe a ballot screen that would allow them to easily download other browsers from the internet and to turn off Microsoft's browser Internet Explorer. Now, I mean, you've got to be kind of stupid to demand something like that, because for one thing, I mean, yeah, sure, Microsoft is dominant in the desktop operating system market. We can all agree on that, I'm sure. The thing is, though, what's stopping a user from using Internet Explorer to download an alternative web browser? What's stopping them? It's not like Microsoft is actually deliberately preventing people from using Internet Explorer to download an alternative web browser. They're not doing that. Now, that would be an antitrust violation, sure, but in this case, this is just silly. This is just pathetic. And even if this did stand up to validity, what about Apple, right? Well, Apple sells Macintosh, which comes with, by default, the Safari web browser and nothing else. So what about them? I'm just going to ignore them, are we? Do we really want to trust the EU on things like this? I mean, really? That when they have so little understanding of technology, of the industries in which they are creating rules for, do we really want to be trusting them even on a political level at that point? If they can't pass the business level, why are we trusting them on a political level as well? And here's a point, the Schengen Agreement. To talk about the political level of what the EU have been doing, we've got the Schengen Agreement, the notorious open borders policy of the EU, and of course heavily controversial, as you can imagine, which basically means that member states who have signed the Schengen Agreement can issue EU cards to citizens so that they can pass through borders without a passport. Well, what's so bad about that? The reason why that's bad is because it's a lot easier for a criminal to pass through countries within the EU. That's why. Do you really want to allow criminals to enter your country? Really? And then of course we had all those terrorist acts, and this is why, you know, the EU's open borders policy was so controversial, because once those terrorist attacks started, you'd like to wonder, well, how the hell did they manage to have the capacity to enter into our countries if they are claimed to have come from the Middle East? If that claim were true, and the open borders policy is enabled, then who's in the wrong exactly? Oh yeah, the EU, because they're exposing the national sovereignty of EU member states. And is that a good idea? No. Also, on that note, Britain did not sign the Schengen Agreement. And what that means is that whether you are an EU citizen or not, you have to bring valid documentation, such as a passport, with you to the UK before you can even enter our country. Now, the way that people generally do it in order to bypass border control is to go by boat. So you go by boat, you pass physically into the country without going through border control, because there's no real border control at the shores. I mean, it's practically impossible to do it. And what you end up with is people on boats going across the channel from France to the UK, and being able to enter the country unfettered and without any form of actual control. Now, of course, that is a problem, but I would not even advise or even suggest to put police on patrol across all of our shores, because that would just be ridiculous and absurd, but also it would be way too expensive. They've got other more important things to do. And I'm not saying we should just lock down our country. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, you know, if there are ways for people to enter our country despite the fact that we do not have the Schengen Agreement. So that's where most of the immigration problems come from, and not necessarily because we lack border control. So just keep that in mind. And of course, when the Leave voters said, "Oh, immigration's a problem," well, we still technically have the power to deport immigrants back to their home country. Of course, we wouldn't technically be allowed to do that if their home country happens to be under human rights action by the United Nations, for example. So if their home country is in fact dangerous or a war-torn country, then it would technically be illegal for the UK government, or any government for that matter, to deport. Of course, that's the whole idea, isn't it? Really, you attack countries like Syria and Libya, and you bomb them to all hell. And then you have this migration crisis where people are coming to your countries, you know, the countries that are bombing the living shit out of them. And then you end up in a situation where you're just like, well, it's kind of like a catch-22 situation, right? Because you've got migrants coming from the Middle East, and you've got America and the UK and any other European country deciding we should bomb Syria or Libya or whatever, and they're the ones saying we should welcome these refugees, and it's like, what? How hypocritical can you be? You don't care about them, yet you're welcoming them into your country. So, you know, I mean, the only real thing you can get out of that is to suggest that perhaps there's an agenda behind it. And I would suggest that there is an agenda behind it, because otherwise they wouldn't be doing the things that they're doing and causing this massive refugee crisis. I mean, if you want to visit a country, sure, you know, you can visit any country you want, but doing it en masse and in the way that in which it is being orchestrated here in Europe it's dangerous. It's scary. You're diluting populations, you're diluting cultures, and you're destroying cultures as a result of that. And that's not necessarily a good idea. We have a cultural heritage that we want to prosper, that we want to help prosper. You know, that's why tourism is a big factor when it comes to economics. And if that tourism is being impacted upon by the cultural dilution caused by this refugee crisis, then that could have an economic impact on us as a country, and that could have an economic impact on tourism and the industry as a whole. Tourism itself could be completely destroyed as a result. You know, there's so many implications with regards to this refugee crisis, and the simple solution really is to stop bombing the frickin' countries in the first place. I mean, how stupid can you get, really? I just don't know. And, you know, what did the EU say when it came to the refugee crisis? Let's take a look, shall we? Turkey, EU, refugee crisis. Let's take a look. There was a specific article I saw. I think it's this one. Here we are. So we've got, as images of desperate women and children at the border gate appear on TV screens around the world, Newman, I'm not going to attempt to pronounce that, sorry. The country's deputy prime minister told the media Turkey has reached the limit of its capacity to absorb the refugees. And then later, this person says that the EU foreign policy chief said there is a moral, if not legal, duty to provide protection. To who exactly? The refugees? You know, I'm not against refugees. They are fleeing war and they do obviously need some sort of help in some way, shape or form, right? I get that. I get the sympathy behind that. I really do. But, you know, the Turkey themselves did say that they reached the limit of its capacity to absorb the refugees. So, you know, what can you do about it, right? And the thing is, though, this is the hypocrisy coming from the EU, right? There is a moral, if not legal, duty to provide protection, yet they're allowing these countries to bomb the living crap out of the Middle East, and not denouncing any of them. If you want to provide moral duty to Syrians, then perhaps tell the UK and America to stop bombing them. But of course they're not going to do that because, again, it's a political agenda. Do we really want to trust the EU that says stuff like this with that such gross hypocrisy? There is a moral, if not legal, duty to provide protection while allowing the bombings of Syria and Lebanon to go on unchecked, without question. And we all say the EU is pro-consumer. They're not pro-consumer, they're anti-consumer, they are anti-people, they are anti-everything. They do not care. If I didn't know any better, they are a terrorist organisation and they should not be trusted. This is an opportunity for Britain to leave the EU. It is not an opportunity to deny the people's vote to leave the EU based on the say-so of people who clearly haven't done their research. You can say all you damn well like about trade. But from my point of view, the trade issue is not going to outweigh the fact that the EU is allowing war. It is not going to outweigh the fact that, given the evidence that I have provided in this video, that they are anti-consumer and are ignorant at the best of times on simple things like energy classification labels. As much as that sounds silly, it is true. Please, if you're going to write a petition like this, give your citations and tell me what you know about the EU, rather than being a scapegoat for the people who think they know what they're doing and just repeating the same words that come out of their mouth. Please do your research. That's all I'm asking. And please, if you're going to promote the EU, at least understand the implications that the EU has on the world itself. Because as we can clearly see, the EU is not exactly trustworthy when it comes to politics. And it's certainly not trustworthy when it comes to acting responsibly as a potential government. So don't think that the EU is going to help us if we were to remain, because if anything the EU is going to do is it's going to make things worse, as it has done in the past with all its common prefixed policies and the migration crisis that it allows to go unchecked. And when I say that, I mean when they refuse to accept the fact that England and America and any other country that happens to be with them in the Middle East, killing people senselessly and making it a dangerous country to live in. For the love of God, understand where your heart lies. If you really care about people, would you really trust the EU? Really? Because I wouldn't. Thank you for listening.